Well, I remind parents that after our children are 18, we have no legal obligation, and everything we do for them, we choose to do for them.
Okay, that's a good boundaried starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just remember, you're choosing everything you
Right.
do. You don't have to, and you're choosing it. And so are you choosing to do things you want to, or are you not okay with it? So start there. So I usually have parents kind of draw their bottom line with what they're okay with and what they're not okay with.
Yeah.
Create some expectations that would feel better. I tell parents, and of course it's different if the kid's 12 or 16 or 22, but I'll start with the adult living in the house. I encourage parents to treat them like a tenant and to have an agreement in place. Like, hey, you're welcome to live here. And here's what I'm willing to provide for you.
This is the Turn Your Life Around podcast, and I'm the 180 Lady. I've been helping people turn their lives around since 2007 as the founder and CEO of a large mental health company. The purpose of this podcast is to have meaningful conversations with old friends and new friends. Everyday people just like you and me about how they turn their lives around. We'll discuss all things mental health, fitness, finances, relationships, parenting, spirituality, you name it. My hope is that you can take something away that will encourage you today. I'm your host, Sarah Coates. Are you ready to turn your life around? Hello, welcome to the podcast, the Turn Your Life Around podcast. We have a great episode coming up. I want to thank you for taking time to find us and listen to our episode today. And, if you like what you hear today, give us a like, a follow, subscribe to the podcast. You can find us all over the place, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and we would just love to hear from you. And hey, I really appreciate you listening. So today I want to introduce one of our friends on the podcast. Her name is Amy Werner, and Amy is a wife, a mother, daughter, sister, friend, mental health advocate, and educator. Professionally, she works for a behavioral health company supporting the outreach efforts of a national team who are connecting people to care. She also has a small parent coaching practice where she supports parents of adolescents through young adults who are living with behavioral health symptoms and diagnoses. For fun, Amy loves to be with her people, hiking, cooking, mountain gazing, or when in need of recharge, reading, decorating, or even napping, which is good. Sometimes you need to rest. Yes. Welcome to the podcast, Amy.
Thanks, Sarah. Good to be here.
Thanks for being here. Let me put my readers away because, we're just talking about being that age.
Yes. Yes, it happens.
It does happen. Thankfully, right? Yeah. Thankful to be at that age. Still living.
That's true.
Still thriving.
The alternative.
It does. It does. Well, thanks for coming on to chat. I think we're going to talk about a couple different things, but tell us a little bit. I just read your bio, and you work for a professional company. Tell us a little bit about what you do there.
Yeah, so I work for Odyssey Behavioral Health, and we're a national company that offers levels of care for folks living with primary mental health diagnoses, co-occurring mental health and addiction issues, eating disorders. We offer outpatient care, so locally people can heal at home with PHP and IOP level of care, which is so important. And we also have several residential treatment centers across the country for the same diagnoses as I mentioned for outpatient. So. And then I work for their outreach team. So I support the team nationally to help the liaisons that are working in their local markets to help folks who are looking for that higher level of care and connect them to care.
So you are super connected, and we know this because we call you when we need some connections, but you're connected all over the country with these treatment centers.
Yeah. So as we're expanding and opening treatment centers from Florida to Pennsylvania, Virginia, and then all the way to California, definitely as I work with the local teams, I'm learning more and more about all these markets. But mostly, of course, as you know, I've been here for a long time and kind of know what's going on here in the triangle.
Explain to the listeners who don't know, what is PHP and IOP?
Yeah, great question. So PHP is day treatment, really would probably be a better name for it. But it is partial hospitalization is what it stands for. And so for folks whose mental health symptoms are interrupting their ability to live their daily life, maybe go to work, go to school, take care of their families, they can stay at home and go to programming for about 30 hours a week. It's mostly group therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And, in our community here, there are opportunities to do that for primary mental health, like my organization offers, but also there's substance use and others that offer eating disorder
Right.
treatment as well. So no matter what the diagnoses or the mental health symptoms, um, there is an opportunity to heal at home. And then IOP is a shorter version of that, really. It's usually 3 hours a day, 3 to 5 days a week. So think 9 to 15 hours a week. I'm just working on their skills to be able to live with the symptoms that they have. It's not a cure.
Yeah.
We know that there really is no cure for mental illness or the mental health symptoms. But if folks can learn how to live with them and learn how to live with them in real life while they're still operating in their real life, there tends to be longer recovery.
Yeah. I think in my experience, obviously I'm heavy in the outpatient world, one time a week, mental health therapy. I think a lot of people, when that's not working, they think that they have to go to the psych hospital. Like they don't understand that there's like an in-between. There's multiple in-betweens. And I just think or wish that there could be something where we could just educate the lay public a lot more on if one time a week outpatient therapy isn't enough for you. You don't have to go to an inpatient hospital. There's so many levels of care in between.
Right. And I think that folks across this community in my role, in outreach roles, are in it because they're passionate about connecting people into care. And so I think most of us, that's what we spend our time doing, is trying to educate folks. And then there's a lot of great organizations out there like NAMI and the Foundation of Hope and, that are also trying to do that. So I can tell you in the 7-8 years I've been doing this, it's better.
It's expanded. Yeah.
People understand it more.
That's good.
So yeah, but I agree with you. People need to understand that there's a lot that can be done to keep people at home.
Yeah, for sure. Which is so important. I mean, there's not many people who can go away to a residential stay. They have families, jobs. I mean, they have to attend to these things. So tell us a little bit about how you even became passionate about this role. How did you get into this?
Yeah, not a short story though. Okay.
That's why we're here. Yeah.
So, in my bio, I kind of always lead with who I am as a family member. So that's how I got into this. So some people have heart disease or diabetes or cancer that's kind of courses through their family veins, and they will say it's their family disease, but mental illness and addiction actually are my family disease. So literally for my entire life, I say I've lived with mental illness, and really, honestly, not mine. So as a daughter, sister, niece, cousin, mother, it's really been my role to live with folks who live with mental illness. So as a caregiver, and of course, everyone isn't diagnosed. But as I learn more, and I look back, a lot of my childhood and my family of origin makes sense. So then I married into a family that mental illness and addiction was the family disease. I didn't know that at 23, 24 years old. Either did he. But of course, we learned that as our journey over the last 30 years has taken us. And it's continuing in the next generation, right? So it's biological. It's hereditary. Several of the kiddos in that are all young adults now in the next generation are also experiencing different levels of acuity. Many may have some anxiety, low-level depression. I have a daughter who lives with severe and persistent mental illness. Her symptoms really blew up when she was 11.
Oh, wow.
So her first suicidal ideation and hospital evaluation was at 11.
Wow.
Our journey from there to here, she's 27 years old now, has been enlightening and challenging and terrifying. I've almost lost her several times to suicide attempts. And I learned through other family members before her prepared me, but I really learned about navigating the mental health system with her. About finding a therapist and a psychiatrist, and the fine art that medication management is not. It really is trial and error. And then having to make difficult decisions about acute stabilization or residential treatment stays as well. So so it's just in my blood, literally, is how I got here.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. 11.
11.
I have 2 kids of my own. I can't imagine what that was like at 11.
Yeah, it was terrifying. And I'm going to actually bring another point out that it was really hard. So mental health is also called behavioral health.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if people sit back and think about it, it looks like behavior.
Yeah. Right.
So I made a lot of mistakes.
Okay.
Because I thought
it was naughty behavior.
She was being willful.
Right.
She just didn't want to go to school.
Right.
She was just being, having a temper tantrum to try to get her way. And I thought that about other members of my family when I look back and was younger about, the family events where there was insane fights at Christmas, right? And now I had an aunt tell me recently she thinks she and 2 of her sisters had bipolar disorder, which explains kind of that explosive behavior.
Right.
The substance use that runs through our family, well, often that's self-medication, and we think they can help that too.
Yeah.
So the part of the stigma with behavioral health is we think people can control it. So I did too.
Yeah.
And took me a long time and a lot of professionals to say that that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So because of your experience, that led you into your role.
Yes.
Your outreach roles.
Led me into my outreach role. But first, at one point, I had to quit my job because I was traveling and I needed to be home.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter's illness really kind of took over our family for a little while, and not wanting to sit still, I went and got certified to be a parent coach because what I was learning at this point, we were probably 4 or 5 years into our journey. There's a lot of help for the person who's living with the diagnosis. There wasn't a lot out there, and we are going back 12, 15 years. There wasn't a lot out there for the folks who are living with them or supporting them, particularly not parents.
Right.
So I went and got certified through a national organization and started a small coaching practice then. I put that on the shelf. And when I decided to go into this outreach role, which kind of blended everything at that point that I had done, I started working at an acute stabilization hospital and then stepped down to outpatient. And now I do a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that there's a lot of help for the individual with the illness, but not a lot of support or as much support as needed for these parents. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about some of the things that you encounter when you coach parents. Like, what are they struggling with and how do you help them through that?
Yeah. And so, every parent's struggling with everything. Like a parent of a 3-year-old might be struggling with potty training, or a parent of a 5-year-old might be struggling with getting the child to kind of regulate their body. And those aren't my people. And there are people out there for them.
Yep.
The folks that I generally work with, their kiddos, usually I would say 12 is the youngest. I have some families as young as 10. And up through mid-20s. So young adolescents through young adulthood. Every single one of my families, their child has some sort of behavioral health diagnosis. So maybe they're on the neurodivergent, Asperger, ASD spectrum. And there's a lot of behavior that comes with that. Severe and persistent mental illness. There's a lot of arrested development that comes with raising an adolescent who has paralyzing anxiety, or, major depressive disorder, or an eating disorder, or self-harm, or SI, all those things. And then into young adulthood, a lot of the behavioral health, mental health symptoms, diagnoses cause what used to be called failure to launch.
Yeah.
I'm on a one-woman campaign to change that to delayed adulthood.
Right.
I think failure to launch sounds like you had one chance, it didn't work, and now you're stuck forever.
Right.
Where delayed adulthood means there's some gaps here. You aren't kind of typically developing with your peers, but there's still hope.
Right.
That we can move forward. So I usually work with folks who I see a lot of school disruption or school refusal, a lot of explosive behavior, or just like acting out in a way that makes the climate in the home pretty tumultuous.
Right.
Delayed adulthood, I see a lot of like 20, 22, 24-year-olds who are living like a 14-year-old at home.
Yeah.
And, just getting parents to learn how to accommodate without disabling. the kid. So like, how do they still have expectations? How do they still adhere to what I call their parenting integrity? So like, you don't want to compromise what you believe in just because your child has a disability or a diagnosis. So how do you kind of merge the understanding of the two and make accommodations and
right. Well, there's a lot of those kids.
A lot. And more so now than ever.
Yeah. And I read an article the other day, and I do agree with this. It is very hard to live on your own now. Yeah. Like, even if you have a college degree and maybe you landed a job.
Yeah.
The cost of living in Raleigh on your own is absurd. And so.
But it isn't just about living on your own. Okay. I'm talking about the 22-year-old who's at home and doesn't have a job.
Okay, right.
Who didn't continue school after high school, if they even got their high school diploma.
Yeah.
Who is not contributing to the household practically or financially and is still acting like a 14-year-old.
Yes, right.
And so the parents are still treating them like a 14-year-old. So they're stuck.
Yeah.
I'm talking
those individuals.
Those individuals. Mm-hmm. I think I read something recently that 55% of young adults between the age of 18 and 32 are living at home.
Right.
And I think that
makes sense.
That is a financial implication. And we're really the only country in the world that expects people to move out at 18.
Look, I've said that forever. I'm like, why do my kids have to leave at 18? Like, I would love for them to stay forever.
Yeah. Well, maybe not forever, but for a little bit longer. Yeah, no. And so I think I want to differentiate that too. This isn't that they're home because of financial constraints.
Right.
But the way they're living at home.
Yes.
So, if you have a 24-year-old living at home and they're going to work or they're furthering their education, they're saving money or either in a bank account or by not living on their own, whatever it is. But you feel okay with it, then there's not a problem.
Right.
But it's the parents that come to me and they're like, my kid, their room looks like had it when they were 12 and they sit in their room and play video games all day and they won't do their dishes and they won't get a job and we just can't get them to even go get help. Like, clearly there's mental health issues or they're smoking pot in my house and it's not okay with me. Like, that's the problem, is when they're not progressing in life.
And the parent isn't okay with it.
And the parent isn't okay with it.
Yeah. So how do you help a family like that? Like, what are some coaching tips or techniques that you do?
Well, I remind parents that after our children are 18, we have no legal obligation, and everything we do for them, we choose to do for them.
Okay, that's a good boundaried starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just remember, you're choosing everything you do. You don't have to, and you're choosing it. And so are you choosing to do things you want to, or are you not okay with it? So start there. So I usually have parents kind of draw their bottom line with what they're okay with and what they're not okay with.
Yeah.
Create some expectations that would feel better. I tell parents, and of course it's different if the kid's 12 or 16 or 22, but I'll start with the adult living in the house. I encourage parents to treat them like a tenant and to have an agreement in place. Like, hey, you're welcome to live here. And here's what I'm willing to provide for you.
Right.
And here's my expectations for you.
Right.
And here's what's going to happen if you don't meet those expectations.
Yeah.
So, and that varies. If you have a 22-year-old who's doing like DoorDash and making a little bit of money, but they're not doing anything around the house, charge them. Charge them rent, make it uncomfortable. I always say there needs to be, if you don't want them, like if you want your kids living with you forever, Sarah, make it so they'll never want to leave.
Right.
But if you don't want them living with you forever, make it so they want to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Both of my children stayed a little bit after they were 18, and we implemented an adult living agreement on their 18th birthday or graduation, whichever happened for either of them, that what their financial obligation was, what their contribution to the house was. I didn't call it a chore anymore. What our moral code was in our house. Right. Like what I was okay with and not okay with. Yeah. And kind of told them like what was going to happen if they didn't heed that.
Yeah.
And that trickles down. Like when I'm working with a parent of a 16-year-old or a parent of a 12-year-old, they can't kick their kid out.
Right.
Or necessarily maybe charge them, but they can have expectations and then there can be consequences. I like to frame it in the positive, like as long as you complete a full day of school, let's say it's for a 12-year-old that's not going to school, you can have your video game time after school.
Right.
It's the same as saying if you don't go to school, you can't play your video games.
Yeah.
I really try to teach parents that our kids hear what we tell them to do. So if we say, if you don't, you can't, they're hearing, I don't think you're going to, so I've already decided your punishment.
Okay, right. It's kind of negatively.
It's just negative. And you're saying like, I've already decided because I know you're not going to do it. Whereas you say like, yeah, hey, as long as you go to school today, you can have your 2 hours of video game time after school.
Right.
So, it's saying to the kid, like, I expect you're going to go to school and I've already planned what you're.
I already planned for you to have your reward. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I like that.
So some of it is just teaching parents to reframe how they talk.
Mm-hmm.
They complain about the culture in their house and the way their kids talk to them. And I ask them, how do you speak to your child?
Right.
What does that look like? Or, someone said to me recently, like, I feel like I'm always in a wrestling match with my kid. And I'm like, drop the rope. Stop arguing.
Okay.
You can't be in a one-sided argument. Try it. Go try it. Go try to argue with yourself. Right.
Yeah, right.
And they're like, oh, I'm like, say what you have to say and then say no more.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice. Like, stop talking.
Stop talking. Say less is the kids say.
Less.
Say less.
Yeah, that is.
So I think there's a lot of, for all parents, there's some like basic principles that are just better parenting.
Mm-hmm.
How you say things, treating your child like you want to be treated, like hitting your kid and saying, you can't hit me.
Right.
Doesn't
work.
Doesn't jive, right? So sort of behaving.
Mm-hmm.
I had a parent recently say, my kid never, ever does their dishes in the morning before they go to work. And I'm like, do you do your dishes as soon as you're done eating breakfast? No, but I pay for the house. And I'm like, that's the role you took on.
Right.
So
right.
It's just saying like, be what you want to see.
Yeah.
So really for all parents, I do give some guidelines like that. And then I really tackle what's your individual problem. I've worked with the families at Wake Monarch Academy. Many of their kids, so that's the recovery high school here, as
yes.
I know many of their kids are coming home from residential treatment. And it's scary for the parents. So I will work with a parent ahead of that to help them set up what's it going to look like? And how's your kid going to earn back the privileges they want as a teenager without you being terrified? Kind of help them set it up like a sober living house. After 30 days of sobriety, you can earn this. And after 60 days, you can earn that. And just holding them accountable, giving them guidance for that. Again, a parent of a 12-year-old, if their big thing is their kid's not going to school and he's playing video games all day, like, how do we leverage those two things?
Right.
Right. So I think there's a million different ways to do it. It's not, I guess, not an easy question to answer, but it is just.
Well, there's just so many different, I think, challenges that parents face. And then you couple that with mental health diagnoses.
Yeah.
And then now it's like almost a double whammy because you've got regular adolescent pushback.
Right.
Probably.
Yes.
And then you couple that with a diagnosis.
Yes.
And now it's like a strong challenge.
Then you don't know what to do. And when your kid, let's say you have an adolescent who is suicidal or self-harming or a kid who has addiction, you become fearful as a parent to do anything, to have any expectations for them because you think you're going to drive them back to or towards.
Right. And some kids threaten that.
Oh,
so
then they really manipulate it because they're like dogs. Like they sense your fear. So they know what they're doing. So I have a parent, my biggest parenting principle that I tell every parent the first time we meet is that most of us parent out of fear. I bet if you sat for a minute and thought about it.
That's 100% accurate. Like as soon as you said, I was like, yep. Yeah, I could hear that.
So the opposite of fear, literally, if you turn fear upside down, it's hope. So if you say, I am afraid that my child is going to go back to using substances.
Right.
And you turn that upside down, what you're saying is, I hope my child stays away from substances. So it's the same thing, just opposite. And then if you think, okay, I hope my child stays away from substances, how can I support that?
Right.
So it's then asking yourself that question, like, what's my part in it?
Yeah.
How can I support it?
Right.
And some of it is our job to keep our kids safe.
Yeah.
That's our number one job, not to make them happy. Our generation, our parents did not care if we were happy.
No.
They cared if we were not embarrassing the family name in public. That was the first thing they were concerned about. If we were moving in a direction to become productive adults that would hopefully be out of their house by 18.
Right.
So, I mean, And then third, they wanted to make sure we were not embarrassing their family name in public. Like that, like bookended. Like that's all.
Yeah, I can see that.
A joke.
Yeah.
Like
no, but
that's really it. We care so much about if our kids are happy.
Yeah. Why did that change though? I mean, what you're saying is so truthful. I think most of us
I don't know.
would agree. I don't know when that shift happened, but okay.
It happened somewhere between when I left the house and when I raised children, somewhere in that middle.
Anyway.
And I think for your children about, I think 10 years-ish younger than my kids, I think it's way worse for you.
And the kids so I have a family member whose child is even 10 years younger than my kids.
So it's worse.
And she was sharing with me some things and I was like, oh my God, the social pressure for those age, So
it keeps going down, right?
So I felt a little hopeless. You were mentioning hope. It's like, it's getting worse.
Yeah. So I think we have to remember what our responsibility is as parents. And this is across the board. So whether you have a kid with, the one thing I learned in this process, I have 2 children, and they're only 17 months apart. So I didn't learn anything in between parenting them. I was too tired. So I parented them the same, both wonderful, amazing human beings, but one is very neurotypical.
Yep.
So I did also kind of understand that like just normal development was happening parallel, right? So I had that in-house comparison, which was a real big blessing for me. But what I learned is better parenting for one was better parenting for both. Just because my son responded to, if you don't clean your room, you can't go to the birthday party, doesn't mean that's a great way to parent.
Right.
My daughter responded to, hey, as long as you get your room clean by 2:00, you'll be able to go to that party today, or I'll take you to the mall or whatever.
Yeah.
And learning that for her made me do better with him.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So that's a takeaway that I learned. Like, just because your kid doesn't have behavioral health issues, doesn't mean you don't have to change a little bit.
Right. That there's not room to grow for sure.
And then we have to remember that it's our number one job to keep our kids safe. So when they are, let's say 2, and we're in a parking lot, just because they want to run across the parking lot doesn't mean we let them run across the parking lot. And we, somewhere between the time they're 2 and 10, we stop holding their hand and let them walk across the parking lot on their own and trust that they can handle the privilege of that responsibility. So we have to make that judgment as parents. So just because our kid wants to stay out till 2 a.m, or wants to be on video games all day, or wants to smoke a little bit of weed, or wants to whatever it is, if we know that they can't handle the privilege of that responsibility, that they're not going to keep themselves safe, then it's our job as parents to make the decision for them. And they can hate us.
Yeah.
They don't. But they can tell us they hate us and they can be mad at us. And we have to get okay with that.
Yeah. Okay. That point right there, when you said that, I wonder if that's part of the shift. Because about the time the shift happened, you've got internet, social media. Well, internet first.
Yeah.
My kids still laugh that like I didn't even have really the internet in college. Like it kind of came at the end of my college career.
I did not have the internet in college.
Right. Like I literally was going to the college library and pulling the Dewey Decimal boxes out.
Yeah.
So they don't even know what that is. But anyhow, but yeah, first internet and then social media.
Right.
And that whole I want my kids to like me. To me, that parallels like I want the social media universe to like me too.
Yeah.
And so then you're not putting in these like hard-nosed restrictions with your kids because you just want everybody to like you.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the shift. I don't know. I'm trying to
I do think that there's a direct correlation in everything between social media and the issues that we have in this world. So I think that's a really genius like connection.
Also, I remember when my kids were little, the mommy blogs started.
Yeah.
And I remember like having a young one and I was reading all these blogs and everybody had a freaking opinion.
Yeah.
And it was like overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I realized, wait a second, why are these 5 moms' opinions over, more important than what my opinion is? Like it was like everybody had an opinion.
Yeah.
And I stopped reading those blogs.
Yeah.
And just kind of.
But that takes a lot of strength and self-awareness that everyone doesn't have.
But then now it's like not even mommy blogs anymore. Now it's just the internet.
And it's just every 30-second.
Every Instagram clip you see is somebody's opinion about something.
Yeah.
And then you feel guilty like you're not doing it right or
I'm so thankful that I raised my children a little bit before Pinterest.
Yeah.
And a little bit before all of that.
Right.
Because I would have been terribly influenced by it.
Yes. And so I think a lot of parents are.
Yeah.
And so it's like this bombardment of all these
It is.
opinions.
It is.
And then they don't know what to do. So then they don't do anything.
So they don't do anything. And then couple it with you have, and I will tell you, you parent a child with, I sat down with 2 girlfriends the other night, and each of our children have a chronic illness.
Mm-hmm.
They're just all very different.
Right.
Right. So we all talked about the guilt we have for passing these illnesses on to our children.
Right.
As if we knew.
Yeah, exactly.
And we all have 20-something-year-olds. So we really didn't know then, right? Like there's more awareness now,
Right.
but and then we talked about like, what would we have done differently? And I said, I'm glad I didn't know
Right.
that it was a possibility.
Because you couldn't have done anything differently. You just would have felt more guilt.
Or
and
I
shame.
wouldn't have had children. And I
Right.
can't imagine that.
Yeah.
Right. So, so that's
interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really interesting. So there's so much guilt and there's so much fear in parenting. And I think that one of the things I get to do when I work with families, they're usually in crisis. Nobody comes to me because they're having a great day.
Yeah.
You understand that as a therapist. But what I get to do is, for the first time, maybe you kind of just gave me this aha. I get to give them space to sit and think about, what is your opinion? What is your value system? What is your core?
Right.
Like I call it your parenting integrity. Like
what?
And it doesn't have to, like mine and yours don't have to be the same. A mom has said to me, like, everyone tells me my kids shouldn't spend more than 1 hour on electronics a day. And I'm like, I think what you need to do is consider what are the electronics doing for your kid?
Mm-hmm.
And is your kid doing everything they need to do before?
Right.
Are they eating? Are they brushing their teeth? Are they going to school? Are they doing homework if they have homework? Are they moving their body? And then is there time left? Because some days I spend 10 minutes.
Correct. Yeah.
On the fun stuff on my phone. And some days I spend 4 hours.
Right. Right.
Right. It just depends on what time I have available. But also, to your point, stopping listening to what everybody else has to say.
Yeah.
I think is a big thing. But I get them to identify that, like, what feels okay? And at what point does it feel icky to you? I always do this to them. I'm like, when does it feel like something in here where you're like, oh, this doesn't feel right?
Yeah, for sure.
Just because everyone else lets their kids eat McDonald's every day, does that feel right to you?
Yeah.
Like, so identify it. And then identify, what do you want your family culture to be like? What do you want it to feel like? I'm really lucky. I have a sister that lives here. I know you're kind of in that same boat. Super close to my sister. We have 6 children in 4 years. She has 4, I have 2.
Yeah.
So raised together really, closely. And one thing I realized somewhere halfway between raising our kids up, our family, unofficial family motto was, you take care of yourself. You take care of yourself, your stuff. If you're not feeling great, go in your room. If you have junk everywhere, like, do what you need to do, take care of yourself so you can be a good, healthy part of this family.
Okay.
And my sister, a little bit bigger family, she worked full time out of the house. So I remember saying to her kids, like, when you finish with your stuff, go look at someone else and see if they need help. So they had more like an all for one approach.
Right.
Neither were right.
Right.
It's just mine worked for me and hers worked for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's why when you said like that, like, where does it feel icky? Like, where do you get that catch of like, oh, that's far enough? Because every family's value set is different.
Right.
But also, I think a lot of families fail to identify their value set.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like whatever goes.
Yeah.
But that's not real. Like, people say that, but I don't think that's real. I think people definitely have an internal value set. Maybe they're just afraid to say it or whatever the case is.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, sometimes it's hard for me. I've worked with families who are okay with their adolescents smoking weed on their property.
Right. But they might not be okay with heroin. You know what I mean? So it's still a value set.
Or, they might be okay with their kids smoking cigarettes and not whatever it is. But like, I have opinions about that, but it doesn't matter. Right. I had my bottom line and with my family about that. And then they get to decide that for their family.
Right.
And then they get to set that line in the sand. So.
Right. But that's the whole thing. It's the key. It's whatever your value set is, you set the expectations for your family. And it's probably going to look different than your neighbor. And that's okay. But there's got to be these boundaries and expectations. Yeah.
And I think we don't talk about it. And I will say the other thing I work on a lot with families is co-parenting. So it's not therapy that I'm doing.
Yeah.
But as you know, co-parenting causes a ton of stress on a marriage or When you're not married, it's
Right,
even
for
harder.
sure, right.
But really helping parents understand that they don't have to agree. Almost every family in crisis comes and will say, my wife and I are not on the same page. My husband and I are not on the same page. I'm like, y'all don't even have to be in the same chapter. But you have to, if you don't agree, you have to come to an agreement.
Yes.
And that's different.
Right.
That means that agreeing means you think the same. Or if you agree with someone, then you might be giving up how you feel. But coming to an agreement is something you can both live with.
Yeah.
So teaching parents to stop and take time to talk through the tough stuff. So you can come to an agreement, something you can both live with and enforce and have consistency with your kids.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, especially when there's, some sort of neurodiversity or behavioral health issue.
Well, and I find, and I don't do a ton of parenting work, but just in my experience over the years, working with couples and families is you have one parent who understands and gets the whatever the thing is.
Yes.
And then the other parent is like, that's hogwash. There's no such thing as neurodivergent, ADHD, depression. Like, just suck it up and get moving. And so it's really like, I find that's when parenting really struggles because there's a lack of understanding on one side.
Right. And so I actually also try to ignore diagnoses, even though that sounds contradictory to everything I've said, and talk about behaviors and symptoms.
Right.
And,
because you can't ignore that. Or deny it, really.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you have an explosive child, who knows why? But how are you going to interact with that behavior with your kid?
Yeah.
To try to diffuse it.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point. A good starting point is like, if one of the parents doesn't understand the label or the diagnoses, just putting that aside and just start with the symptoms, the explosive behavior or the, school refusal. I mean, that's a big one with a lot of kids.
And it may be a result of a diagnosis, but it may be a result of culture post-COVID.
Or just culture in some of the schools. I mean, a lot of kids have struggle in school just because it's a tough space out there.
It is.
Some of these schools.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Well, cool. So, okay, those are great suggestions for our listeners just to hear that. Do you do more like your roles right now, your professional roles? You're doing a little bit of coaching, a little bit of outreach?
Yeah, so my full-time job is with Odyssey,
right.
working and doing outreach and supporting our national team. Coaching is something that has just resurged in the last few years because of my connections in the behavioral health world. Right. So I mostly just take referrals, kind of very word of mouth. I have no internet presence. I'm just sort of, that would give me more than I could handle.
Yeah.
But like I'll work with parents from Wake Monarch Academy.
Yes.
That's been a commitment I've had with them for 4 years. And then there's a few therapists in town who do couples work, but don't do parenting work. Kind of like what you just said. Like, and you probably understand very clearly, therapy is not about healing past hurts. Like I spend maybe a session letting people problem dump.
The coaching is not about,
I'm sorry.
No,
therapy is about healing past hurts and learning to live with the results of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Watered down. Coaching is about taking you from where you are to where you want to be. So if that's in your profession, if it's running, going from 5K to marathon, whatever it is, it's just meeting people where they are and helping drive them to where they want to go.
Yeah.
I tend to work with families who are kind of just at a breaking point and they've done all the other things. They've gotten therapy, they've gotten their kids diagnosed, they've sent their kids to residential treatment center, they've gotten them in the right school, they've been to therapy, they've kind of laid the foundation. And usually they're in a good place. And I do screen them like to see if they're ready. Yeah. Because there's nothing I can do if you're not ready.
That makes sense.
And the other difference between coaching and therapy is that, with therapy, you meet once a week.
Yeah.
And then you generally have very little contact. So coaching is ongoing. Like I'm accessible by all the time. So we have an hour session a week. It's very focused. You get an assignment. And then we can check in by texting all week long. We can have a phone call or two in between. And then there's a lot of people who like have graduated and they'll have something flare up. They'll have a crisis come up with their kid and they'll come back for one session, or they'll just need a 20-minute phone call, or,
just
they
to
just need
strategize
a little
some stuff.
reminder, remember someone's there for them.
That makes sense.
Parenting's hard.
Parenting is hard.
And it's like, of all the things we do, probably the most impactful and important thing we're going to do for our legacy.
100%.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we do it with the least amount of preparation. I mean, we make a pretty nursery and we read a book or two, but
what to expect when you're expecting.
Right. But that doesn't tell you anything. No. And that's just then. And those babies change and turn into like these humans that are nothing like you, or nothing like your co-parent, or like nothing like you expected.
Yep.
And we just don't do a lot of intentional work. We think we just are like animals in the wild. You're just going to know what to do.
Right.
And sometimes we do, or some of our offspring are more resilient and can handle our mistakes. But sometimes we really need to stop and do some really intentional work.
Yeah. And I think then on the flip side, or maybe even alongside of that, I think it's important. Sometimes you're raising children and you see you see so much of yourself in your child. And then you realize that there's some real things there, that you didn't address when you were, that you haven't addressed as an adult, that you went through as a kid.
Right.
And that's where I think it's really important for those parents to seek out therapy, right? Because there's some wounds, some hurts, maybe even some misdiagnoses.
Oh yeah.
And then now they're raising a child that's almost a clone or identical of them. And they're like, whoa, wait a second.
Or the parent, the parent that was traumatizing.
Yes, exactly. And it could be so triggering. And I think a lot of parents miss out on an opportunity to go address that within themselves so they can be a better parent to that kid.
Yeah.
Because that's maybe what they needed when they were a child.
And so that's where like going to do the therapy work comes in first, right?
That you screen for.
Yeah. So I think it's really hard. And I like to do the coaching because I'm not going to lie. Raising my child was incredibly difficult, really scary, really isolating. There's a lot of shame because I felt like I did something wrong, you know? But I only did it once. So it's not like I got to go through all that and learn all those lessons and then go do better.
Right.
So I feel like, and maybe fortunately, because it would have been really hard to do it again. And because of that, I want to pass those lessons on. It's just, I don't want other parents to feel alone, to think they're the only ones, to think they caused this. A lot of my parents have one child or they have two children who both have behavioral health issues.
Right.
So that really feels like they did this.
Yes. Yeah.
And so to offer just support to parents, just an understanding that you're not alone. And to make everything we've lived through. I always say, my daughter is so lovely. I mean, she just, it breaks my heart sometimes how difficult it's been for her. And I'm so grateful for everything we've learned because we get to be her family.
Yeah.
And if I could take away all her hurt and pain and suffering and keep all her lessons, if that were a possible thing, I would do it because of who I think I have become because of it. I mean, professionally, personally, as an advocate, as a volunteer, who my husband has become because of it, how he has changed and become more compassionate to family members of his that he didn't understand before, the man that my son has grown into because of it, and then ripple out. She has cousins and aunts and uncles and neighbors and friends who stuck around and held us up and loved us through the hospitalizations and the scary days, and who accept that some days are not great for her. And sometimes she's not going to show up at a family function she said yes to. And when she does, it's with all her brightness and light and beauty, and everyone is just as happy as could be to see her. So, it's just, she has given so much to so many people because of all she's been through.
Right. Yeah, that's so powerful. Just
Yeah.
I'm listening to you say that, and the ripple effect, and just the compassion and kindness that has just rippled out because of her
Yeah.
plot or walk in life, whatever you want to call it, because
Yeah.
of her experiences.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It is really beautiful to see.
Because, I mean, you're one of umpteen million families
Yeah.
who are walking the same journey.
Yeah.
And so it's just, there needs to be a lot more compassion for this.
Yeah. And then for the people who don't have it, I'm just so grateful they don't understand it for them, because it is a really hard journey.
Yeah.
So I always do hold a bit of gratitude. Like if someone's judgy or says something unkind or inconsiderate, I'm like, well, good for you that you've never had to love someone through this, right?
Yeah.
And understand it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's just anything we go through. So we either become victims of our circumstances or we do something with it. And I think that I just made the choice a long time ago that I wasn't going to be quiet. I talked about it. I didn't put it on Facebook. I never would, ask for mental illness is still not a casserole disease. So if a loved one is hospitalized because of a suicide attempt, people don't usually show up with a lasagna
or start a meal train,
but we should.
Yeah.
But I didn't, always with my daughter's permission, I didn't keep it a secret.
Yeah.
I'm not ashamed of her living with several diagnoses and all she's been through. I'm not ashamed of it. I can trace it back to someone else, every one of them back to somebody else in the family. So we know where it came from.
Genealogy.
Yeah. I'm really proud of how well she lives with her struggles and how hard she works to overcome. And, some days she's living really well and some days it's hard and she has to lean into it, and we all rally and carry her through whatever episode, as we call it, she's going through. But I've always chosen to share our journey in hopes to show people that it happens in every house.
Yes, I know.
Even behind the white picket fence, I always say.
For sure. I know. Yeah. That's where the social media comparison, you put up your highlight reel.
Yeah.
People aren't really showing. But, you made a good point. People don't bring a casserole for a mental illness or a hospitalization, a psychiatric hospitalization. There's still so much work to do to destigmatize mental illness. Still so much work.
So much work to do. And I want to add a caveat that I did have friends show up with casseroles. I was lucky.
They're good friends.
I mean, I shouldn't say it's not at all, but I mean, I think I have
I would say generally though, you're
generally
probably right.
People are not going to put that out there for that to become a thing, right? People still have shame and embarrassment around it. And, it's just, it's just sad, but it's come a long way too. It's come a long way in the 16 years we've been on this journey. So I can only imagine. Yeah. Where we'll be in another 16 years.
Hopefully, right? Yeah, that's awesome.
Think about your practice and how much it's grown and in demand.
Oh, yeah.
Since you're growing to respond to the demand, not just of our growing population in the Triangle, but the need and the willingness of people.
Yeah. No, we've always grown to respond to the need. Yeah. The demand really is what it is.
So people are willing to get help and
that's true.
To heal.
Yeah.
And so I think that we're just moving in the right direction in this world.
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome. You're doing great work.
Well, thank you.
I'm so proud of you. And I'm thankful for your part in this community to really help people turn their lives around and move forward. That's so awesome. Any final thoughts of wisdom you want to share with the listeners?
I think no matter what it's for, you should just never be afraid to reach out for help.
Yeah.
To not do whatever you're going through alone.
Yeah.
Especially in parenting. And to remember that, these little beings are not necessarily an extension of you. So anything you do is, I always say you shouldn't probably take all the credit or all the blame for your children. That's probably what it is. And, you should not think it's all your fault. And you also shouldn't think you did everything so perfectly that they're just...
that they're just so wonderful.
But get help. Ask for help.
Yeah. No, bingo. That's so good. Don't take all the credit or all the responsibility.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. If someone does want to find you for parent coaching, how would they find you?
I can give you, I have an email address that I can give you to put in the link. It's probably easier that way than for me to try to spell it out. I take on very, few clients, but I'm happy to talk to folks. And if not me, there's other resources. And
Yeah.
that's the thing too, is I have lots of connections in the nonprofit world for resources that are out there. Lots of therapy groups, practices that I would refer to, or even if folks are just not sure where to go, if they think a loved one needs a higher level of care.
I think that's the most important part. You're super connected, and if somebody reached out, you could connect them to the service or the group or whomever that they needed.
I can point people in the right direction all the time, and it's just I always say, for anyone who's old enough to know this, I have a Rolodex in my head. I might as well share the information in it. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming over today and chatting.
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate you.
It's good to see you.
And thanks for listening today. I hope what you've heard today was really helpful and valuable. And I'm sure that there's a listener out there that's going to take away some great things from today. So with that, give us a like and a follow. And thanks for listening. Hi, everyone. I appreciate you taking time to listen. These days we live in feel stressful, challenging, and maybe even chaotic. I'm really passionate about putting out positive content that will encourage and inspire others. I ask that you like, follow, subscribe, and even give us a 5-star review. Most of all, share this with your friends and family so together we can help people turn their lives around.